Chapter 16, The Chase. Pete and Pam looked closely at the hat. It was just like the one Farmer Hill had shown them, and it looked exactly the same as the one worn by the prowler whose picture Pete had taken. "He's here on the island, all right," Pete declared. "Tinker, will you help us search some more?" Tinker said he would do his best. He suggested that they take the hat with them for evidence, so Pete stuffed it in his pocket. Then the three set off again. "If Bo Stinkle's living here, he must have a shack or something," Pam remarked. "It probably wouldn't be near the beach where he could be seen," Pete reasoned. "Let's walk toward the center of the island." The three trudged through the thick underbrush. The grass was high, and the tangle of blackberry vines made progress difficult. After a while, they came upon a thicket of birch trees. "What's that in there?" Pete asked, pointing among the trees. "A little house?" Pam and Tinker looked hard at the spot. "Yes, there is something in there," Pam said. "Looks like a shack." Approaching the place as quietly as they could, the three saw a small hut nearly concealed by the trees. "This is a good hideout," Pete said. "I'll bet it belongs to the thief." Picking their way up to it cautiously, they saw that it had but one room. A tiny porch, half tumbled down, was at the front of the hut. Pete stepped carefully onto the porch and peered through a broken window. "Nobody's in here," he said. Pam opened the door, and the three went inside. An old table and a rickety chair stood in the middle of the room. On the floor alongside the table lay an envelope, which Pete picked up. Excitedly, he showed the envelope to the others. Written on the front was a name and an address. Bo Stinkle, General Delivery, Stony Point. "We're on his trail!" the boy exclaimed joyfully, putting the envelope in his pocket. "This is Bo Stinkle's hideout." Hardly had he said this when there was a rustling sound at the back of the shack. Pete dashed through a little door at the rear just in time to see somebody racing off through the bushes. "There he is! After him!" the boy cried. Pete raced as fast as he could, pushing bushes and low-hanging branches aside. Pam and Tinker brought up the rear. It seemed as if they were gaining on the fugitive when suddenly Pete tripped over a blackberry vine and fell flat on his face. The fall knocked the wind out of him. He lay still for a moment until Pam and Tinker helped him to his feet. Now the man was far ahead of them. By the time the searchers picked up the trail again, they heard the sputter of a motorboat. "He's gone!" Pam cried in dismay. "Not quite!" Pete shouted, racing onto the shore before the others. The boat was about 10 feet out, and Pete made a dash for it, splashing into the water. He threw himself toward the boat, grabbed onto the sides as it sped into deeper water. "Hey, get off of there!" shouted the man in a rasping voice. Pete continued to climb in, staring hard at him. He had a small black head with black hair that stuck up straight. His eyes were close set, his nose thin, and his mouth cruel-looking. Bo Stinkle. "Let go!" he shouted again and reached toward Pete. "Not until you give yourself up," the boy replied bravely, pulling himself over the side of the boat. Bo Stinkle snarled and like lightning shoved a bony hand at the boy. It caught Pete on the chest and sent him reeling backward into the water. He disappeared. When Pam saw this, she screamed. "Don't worry," Tinker said. "Pete's a good swimmer, isn't he?" But the boy did not come up immediately, and the boat churned away. "Oh dear," Pam said nervously. "Maybe that man knocked Pete out." Then, suddenly, she saw his head pop to the surface, and with strong strokes he swam to shore. "Oh, I thought you were drowning," Pam cried, as her brother waded, dripping wet, onto the shore. "I swam underwater so Bo wouldn't see me," Pete explained. Then it was Bo Stankle?" Pete exclaimed. "Sure was. We'll get him yet." The children decided that the best thing to do was return to Shoreham and tell the police about Bo. They hopped into their boat, and Pete gave it all the speed he could. It went so fast that the prow lifted out of the water a little. "I'll land at the police dock," Pete said. And in a little while, he drew alongside it and stopped. "I guess I'd better get back to the store," Tinker said. "You two can handle this alone." He grinned. "You're real good detectives." He went off, and the Hollisters walked into the headquarters. Officer Cal Newberry was on duty. "Hello, children. What can I do for you?" he said, smiling. Pete and Pam told their story quickly. The island was the hiding place for the toy thief, and they thought his name was Bo Stankle. "Here's our proof," said Pete, proudly handing over the note and the little red hat. "This is amazing," Officer Cal said, and wrote everything down. "I'd like to find that thief." Cal said he was new in the department and would like to solve a big mystery. Maybe this was his chance. "Besides," he said, "we can't have a character like Bo Stankle running loose around Shoreham. I'll see if we have any record on him." Cal opened a filing cabinet and looked through a lot of papers. Finally, he exclaimed, "Yes, here's his name and picture." "That's the man!" the Hollisters cried. "He was in trouble at Stony Point last year," Cal said. "He stole a farmer's horse and was caught, but he was let off with a light sentence as it was his first offense." The young policeman closed the filing cabinet and picked up a telephone. As he dialed a number, he said to the children, "I'm calling our state police motorboat patrol at the lakefront to keep close watch on Blackberry Island. I can't go myself because I must stay at headquarters this afternoon." Cal told the lake patrol officer, who answered the phone, about the Hollisters' mystery. He said 2 men would go to the island and would report back at once if they found the thief. Picture. "Well, we better go home now," Pam said. So she and Pete left. When it grew dark that evening, the Hollisters looked over toward Blackberry Island. Every once in a while, they could see lights flashing back and forth. "It's the police," Pete said. Would they succeed in nabbing Bo Stankle? When morning came, everyone eagerly awaited news from Cal Newberry. The telephone rang, and Pete quickly answered it. "This is Officer Cal," the voice said. "I have just received a radio report from our motor launch police." "What did they say?" Pete asked excitedly. "Well, they didn't find anybody," Cal told him. "They're on their way back now. Perhaps you would like to speak to them when they land at the police pier." "Oh, yes, we would," Pete said eagerly, and hung up. Mr. Hollister had not yet left for the trading post, and Pete asked if his father could drive them to the police pier. Pam and Ricky wanted to go too. Mr. Hollister said he would take them. "Sue, Holly, and I are going shopping in town," Mrs. Hollister said. "Suppose you take all of us with you." "Oh, sure, fine." They tied Zip near the garage and gave him his breakfast. Then they drove off. It was not long before they reached the pier. Pete, Pam, and Ricky got out and waved goodbye. The launch was just coming in. Presently, the 2 policemen tied the boat and hopped ashore. The children introduced themselves. "Oh, you're the Happy Hollister detectives," one of them said. "Well, I'm sorry to say we didn't locate Bo Stankle." "Yeah, but we'll get him sooner or later," remarked the other officer. He won't escape us for long." Ricky was intrigued by the police launch. When the men noticed this, he smiled at the children and asked if they would like to look at the boat. "I want to look under it too," Ricky exclaimed. "Does the propeller work like a rubber band, like the toy boats Daddy sells?" When the policeman looked surprised, Pete said, "He's only joking." The officers helped them climb down into the boat. What a big steering wheel it had, Ricky thought. And a motor that could make the boat go faster than any other on the lake, they were told. "Here's our radio," said one of the men. "Would you like to talk to Officer Cal at headquarters?" he asked Ricky. The boy thought this would be fun and picked it up. Officer Cal said he was very glad to hear from Ricky, and then laughed when the boy said he would like to be a motorboat policeman someday. When the three children finished looking over all the gadgets on the police launch, they thanked the officers and started for home. When they arrived, they were amazed to see the back door standing wide open. "Mother must be back," said Pete. But no one was around. "I'm sure she closed this when we left," Pam said, worried. "Maybe somebody's in the house." The children hurried from room to room, keeping together. They looked in closets and under beds, but found nobody. "I guess we were wrong," Pete said, as they returned to the living room. Suddenly, Pam noticed that everything in the room was covered with a fine dust. "Where did this come from, I wonder?" she said. "Maybe the chimney?" Pete suggested. He looked into it, half expecting to see someone hiding up the flue. But he was wrong. "I know," said Ricky. "It came from the cellar. Let's look." He unlocked the door, and the three of them hurried downstairs. What a mess the cellar was. Bricks were strewn all about, and the air was filled with mortar dust. Pete began to cough. Look, he exclaimed to the others. "The bottom of the chimney. It's been torn apart." And that is the end of the chapter. Chapter 17 will be called A Telltale Barn.